Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death in the embrace of Messmer's flame.
Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, how would you like to get all close up with your enemies, oil them up, treat them real nice, and then treat them to a little bit of the loving embrace of Messmer's flame? To put it in simpler terms, one of the new incantations added in the DLC, one of the potential Remembrance boss rewards for Messmer the Impaler, is called Messmer's Orb. This is essentially just a representation of his opening and phase swap attack, where he surrounds himself with a giant glorious ball of flame in his hand, and then descends upon you and then explodes. The difference is you get to be the ball, and there are a number of things not only from the base game, but also new to the DLC as well that boost the damage of this specific way of playing the game. And there is also another pretty powerful new incantation that completely synergizes and overlaps with this that just adds to the toolkit you have while using it as well. So let's break it all down and talk about what makes this so cool, as well as where you can get the things that you need to make it this strong, with the caveat that I will be assuming that you either have or know how to get all components of this from the base game. And then we'll talk about the stat split that you want and how to play the build in general, or any tips that I have. Starting off with the Sacred Seal you will use to cast the incantations, then you want the Fire Knight Seal. This is a new one in the DLC that boosts the damage of Messmer Flame incantations specifically by 15%, which is quite a solid amount. This hits 333 incant scaling at 80 faith, but that is enough with that bonus, that effect that it damages the best scaling seal, the Erdtree Seal. Ideally you would have one of these in each hand, so 2 Fire Knight Seals whenever you have an opening to actually freely cast the incantation, and you would accomplish that by getting a friend to drop theirs for you, or joining up and asking in our Discord, which you can find down in the description, as there are just plenty of people willing to help. Though it is worth noting, if you don't want to bother with that, holding Fire Knight Seal in one hand and then casting with Erdtree Seal itself in the other hand is only about 10% weaker than having double Fire Knight Seals, so while it is less, it's not a build-ending amount less. As for how to get this yourself then, it is in the Cathedral District of the Shadow Keep, specifically after you have drained out this area. The big building in the middle here has a statue of Marika in the middle of it that you can even access from above if you have the grace that's closer to that. It is literally just behind the statue of the Marika that is right there when you actually arrive. Past then, we also are using a dagger in our main hand as a secondary weapon that we swap on and off instead of the seal, and honestly it's not often that you get to cast with 2 seals out, just because against properly hard enemies you will need a boost of poise to get Messmer's Orb off successfully. We do that with the Endure Ash of War that we have on a misery cord, just in case you do happen to get a stagger on anything before they die for the bonus crit damage. You can set this to either Flame Art or Sacred Affinity depending on the weaknesses of the enemy that you're fighting. Past that we have our armor. For the helm you will want Messmer's helmet itself, which you can buy from the Round Table Hold after killing him. This boosts Messmer Flame incantations by 3% while equipped. It is a relatively minor boost, but it is technically more than if you just had like Rakshasa helm on, so it is worth it. As well, there is the Fire Knight chest piece. This is farmed from any Fire Knight enemy, the easiest 2 being just down the main elevator from the Storehouse 1st floor, Site of Grace, or just a short walk forwards from the Storehouse 7th floor, Site of Grace. Specifically, this chest piece only when unaltered, which is sad as somebody who really likes the altered version visually, this chest piece will give you a 5% damage boost to Messmer incantations. So again, not a massive one, but more than you would get from generic damage boosting armor. Then for your other 2 slots, either fashion if you want it, or for pure min-max, you would take the Rakshasa, Gauntlets, and Greaves for around a 2% damage increase each, and this comes from the Eastern Nameless Mausoleum in the Recluse River downstream section out of the Illusion Wall exit of the Shadow Keep. After that, we of course have our Talismans, which is relatively simple for this one. Godfrey Icon Talisman for a 15% damage boost to charged spells, and both spells that we are using here today are chargeable. Then Flogg's Canvas Talisman for an 8% boost to incantation damage in general, then the Fire Scorpion Charm for a 12% boost to fire damage at the cost of some Damestication Loss as well. If you do feel that you are taking too much damage with the Scorpion Charm on, you can always just instead switch it out for the Faithful's Canvas Talisman. This is the mini incantation boost talisman, which is just a 4% damage boost, so you do lose damage over the Fire Scorpion, but it is sometimes worth it if you just want to be a little bit tankier. The final slot then is somewhat of a flex one, but for my time playing this, I think you most often will just want Dragon Crest Great Shield in here. Our armor isn't the most defensive, and we are using a Scorpion Charm. We are also using Endure to purposefully trade hit hits. The extra damage negation makes a pretty notable difference in this situation. Then moving on from that, we of course have our spells for the day. You want Golden Vow for a 15% all damage buff and 10% damage negation buff for 80 seconds after casting. Flame Grant Me Strength for a 20% buff to our fire damage, which is of course all of our damage, for 30 seconds after you cast it. And then our offensive spells are of course Messmer's Orb, which comes from the Messmer Remembrance, and Fire Serpent, which is actually a really useful little side tool for this that does over 4,000 damage to most enemies. It can hit headshots on headshottable enemies and comes out quickly enough that you can often use this safely at range when you would otherwise have to endure if you wanted to use Messmer's Orb. While most of my gameplay will be focusing on using Orb because that's what I think is fun more than anything, Fire Serpent is an extremely useful tool that is also perfectly synergistic within our setup, being a charged Messmer Flame Incantation. As for how to get this one, it is easiest grabbed from the Storehouse back section, Site of Grace, and just for clarity's sake, I'll just let the full path play out from here. I will also mention that you can obviously use pretty much any other incantations if you want to for utility or variety, but these are the two that are most buffed by our setup, the ones that our setup is sort of built around. So, you know, enjoy the walk. Past that is of course the Wondrous Physic Concoction, and inside of here we have the classic Flame Shrouding Cracked Tear for a 20% boost to fire damage done for 3 minutes after drinking, as well as the new Oil Soaked Cracked Tear. This gives you a sort of aura, you just literally oil yourself up, where if you basically touch an enemy while it's active, they take 20% more fire damage while they have the oil debuff. And it's worth noting that because this is a debuff, it overwrites things like the buff to enemies that are wet, which then makes them take less fire damage, and that's just an interesting secondary note here. A fun part of this as well is just by the way that the Messmer's Orb incantation works, you sort of automatically apply the oil just before the big pop of damage actually happens, as you fly right at and into the enemy as part of the incantation before it explodes, which just works great for this, obviously. As for how to get this one, it is from the Furnace Golem directly southeast of the Castle Watering Hole Site of Grace. And then now that you know all the pieces that come together to make the build function, let's just talk about the actual stats that you will want to be able to use it. First, you want 60 Vigor, just to be able to survive properly in the DLC. Then you want 80 Faith, as that is our main scaling stat, and that is the soft cap. Past that, you want to get at least a few points in Endurance. Our weight is quite low in this setup, but you do want the stamina from the stat more than anything, honestly, just because it'll let you do some more chain dodging when you need to for later bosses in the DLC. Make sure that you have the required stats to actually use your dagger, then the rest of your points can pretty much just go straight into Mind for more casts before needing to drink a flask and, you know, the comfort that that offers. As for how to play it then, this one is relatively simple. Apply all of your buffs before beginning any challenging fight, then walk in, throw out a Fire Serpent if it is a boss that takes their time getting to you, otherwise bring out the dagger, endure just before they're about to hit their opening hit, and instantly use Messmer's Orb with your left hand seal. This maximizes the duration of the endure window overlapping with the orb cast. There is a still just like a very slight, like half second at most moment between hitting the ground and exploding, where an enemy can knock you out of it because the endure doesn't last quite that long. That said, the vast majority of enemies just don't hit frequently enough at all for that to become an actual concern. That said, always remember that you have Fire Serpent as well at your disposal for faster enemies, as it just lets you use smaller openings to still do really great damage, honestly. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Messmer's Flame Incantations taken to their rightful place of explosive power. And of course, you could take this even further by adding like that full-on pre-fight madness application gear swapping stuff, but you know that already if you're someone who is willing to do that level of min-max in general. This, however, is the version that I would present for the average player, though. That said, I hope you've enjoyed this. This is one of the more fun builds that I've played in the DLC, and I hope you enjoy it too if you try it out for yourself. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.